All right, sorry about that, guys. Hi, I didn't mean to set a second timer. Hi, everybody. Welcome to. Thank you for coming to FreeThinkers Fireside. My name is Helen, also known as House Bells, and this is the podcast where we put the human and humanist one cozy conversation at a time. And tonight, I would like to welcome our guest, Seth Andrews. So let's say hi to Seth. Hi, Seth.
Hi there. Thanks for letting me come out and play along.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on my little podcast. So for like the two people that may not know you, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, no. There's quite a few, I'm sure there. So I am a former evangelical Christian born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I live now. My parents were theologian level believers. They hobnobbed with big televangelists. My mother wrote a Greek New Testament study guide. I was a product of Christian school. We had Christian church. I went into Christian radio when I was only 22 years old, and I spent a dozen years in that business. Then I went into video production, serving mostly churches, flying all around the country, producing fundraising and mission videos for religion. But over the course of time, and I kind of came late to the party, I realized that it wasn't adding up, and I hadn't really done my own thinking about it. And so I finally extricated myself at midlife, and then I founded a website and a podcast that promoted thinking. So thethinkingatheist.com is not the Thinking Atheist, not a person. It is an idea, an encouragement to reject faith and embrace reason. And let's try to figure things out while engaging our brains. And I've been doing this since, I guess, the YouTube page launched 16 years ago, and I've been podcast 15 years, and I've been doing it full time since 2015. So that's almost a decade. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. So I didn't realize you've been doing this. Well, yeah, I probably started watching you around that time. So yeah, that sounds about right. I just didn't realize you were doing it for 10 years that you have been doing it full time. So that's pretty.
Yeah, it was
that's
scary.
Pretty great.
It was one of those things where the company, I was phasing my way out, the company served churches. Now, to their credit, even though the owner was a devout, seminary trained evangelical, he was hard and remains hardcore. He's one of the few believers who actually said to me, "Look, Seth, people died for your right to believe or not believe, and we'll stand by that." And so I was afraid he was going to find an excuse to fire me. But the truth was they took me more and more onto the church work that we were doing, and we did some other stuff for city planners. It was a video and 3D animation production house. And so, we did colleges. And so they gave most of the non-church stuff to me. And I really appreciate that. But, that kind of business was phasing down. So when I took the leap in 2015, it's scary. Like, can I sustain myself? Is there an audience? Is there a need? Of course, in 2015, I thought I'd be more obsolete in 2025. And now I look around and I'm thinking, holy shit, Christian nationalism is on fire, and Project 2025 is everywhere. And the zealots have definitely, the monkeys have taken over the circus. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm kind of glad I'm still here and still kicking. So anyway, I'm babbling, but that's my story. So.
Well, it's money in your pocket, so look at it that way. Look at the chaos. Means you still have a career.
It's crazy. Yay. I was hoping I could work myself out of a job, segue into some other kind of storytelling, maybe.
Right.
We always knew that, religion's not going anywhere. But I was so naive. I never thought we would regress in the way that we have. And I look around and I just think, wow, the billionaire power players, the Family Research Council and Heritage Foundation types, the Leonard Leos and the Barry Sides and all these other, these shadow people behind the Supreme Court and the school boards and Trumpism and everything else. You have to hand it to them. The sneaky bastards, they managed to pull it off. And somebody told me once, they're like, everybody lost the last election. Some people just don't realize it yet. So we'll see how long it takes for them to figure it out.
That is true,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, why did you want to talk about this particular topic when we were? I know you told me, but let's tell all the people.
Oh, well, you and I were kind of like talking about what's on our minds, and like, and it doesn't. uh, Let me back up. I am about to do a series of presentations on the road. I'm
Mm,
going to be at Florida Free Thought, FLO.org, which is in Orlando mid-March, and I'm bringing a speech called "A War Story About Love." And it doesn't sound all that sexy when I talk about the topic in this way, but it really is a compelling journey. But we get into, why do people respond to authority figures? There's something about many people and how we may be evolutionarily wired or culturally conditioned, or could be a combination of nature, nurture. I don't know, but there seems to be a demographic of people that respond to strong men. And when I mean, or strong women, but it's usually men.
mhm,
Uh, and so somebody comes along and I don't know, they throw their weight around, they demonstrate dominance, they crush the weak, those types of things. And people are like, yeah, that's my guy, back the winner. He'll do whatever it takes. He'll break the eggs that make the omelet. He's my horse in this race. And it's weird to see it in evangelical circles, where Jesus was
mhm,
very much about meekness and turning the other cheek, and be charitable, and don't be egotistical, and don't take vengeance, and sell all you have and give to the poor, blah, blah, blah.
blah blah.
And the same
Yeah.
people who were like, yeah, yeah, I love Jesus, he's awesome, then turn around and cheerlead cruelty. I don't know. It boggles my mind. And I think some of it might be because fundamental Christianity has primed a whole demographic of people to respond to authoritarians. I mean, the Christian God, I mean, the Bible is an authoritarian book. It doesn't make suggestions. There aren't the 10 suggestions, they're the 10 commandments. And the word obedience is peppered all the way through there. If you love me, you
Mhm,
my commands, obey, 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 or else. Well, that's authoritarianism. And I think a lot of people who start out in that model religiously, they're pretty easy meat for authoritarians politically, especially if you've got that authoritarian in politics waving a Bible and invoking the name of God. And I'm, of course, talking about Donald Trump tear gassing a crowd in DC to stand in front of a church he doesn't attend and wave a Bible he does not read. That's a signal
mhm.
that
Right.
I am God's proxy. He is the authority. I am God's authority, and therefore I should be obeyed and followed. So, anyway, I'm doing a whole speech that kind of gets into this. We talk about an experiment that was done in the 60s called the Milgram experiment, where people were asked to torture other people, supposedly. How far would they go if commanded by an authority to do it? And I show pictures and video, and I don't know. It's just what's been on my mind. Well, some of what's been on my mind lately. I don't know. Did you come out of a fundy faith? Remind me. I can't remember.
I can't. I was Catholic, and then I was pagan. So,
So
it's
was it like high control Catholicism?
no. We were. My parents were very liberal Catholics. We followed the religion because it's French Catholic, so you follow the religion of your family. And we went to church. I went to CCD. I made my confirmation, all that kind of stuff. But I was allowed to watch secular movies and have friends from different faiths. And I went to public school, and I went to Catholic school the first 8 years of my life. But then when I got into junior high and high school, I went to public school, and I was exposed to people with different ideas, faiths, lack of faith, and over time, especially when the sex abuse scandal happened with the Catholic Church, that was my out. That's why I left, but I didn't leave like magical thinking behind. And then I was in the pagan religion for 13 years, and I was a leader of my own like little group for 10. So, and then I took some philosophy and psychology courses in college, and that was my way out.
Sure. Well, Catholicism has more than its share of high control authoritarianism. The
Oh yeah.
Pope's a great example. And Pope Francis is one of those things where occasionally I do appreciate the fact that he's not as much of an asshole as some of his predecessors, but he's still sitting on a $40 million gilded golden throne. He's still part of a massive corporation. Let's face it, they're one of the biggest businesses on the planet that hoards wealth and resources
Hmm.
with so much suffering in the world. He's still the head of an organization that has been systematically hiding and shielding rapists. And so, I'm like,
Hmm.
well, every time he comes forward and he says something that sounds somewhat egalitarian, I'm like, well, thanks for that. But he's still the supreme pontiff of a tremendously problematic organization, one which to this day still doesn't allow women to serve as clergy. I mean, that tells you something about the nature of the beast, does it not? It's been behind the curve for so long on pretty much every front: the science front, acknowledging our history front, human rights front, equality front, sexuality, all those things. So, when people talk about their experience in the Catholic Church, I'm always interested to find out what the flavor of that was. But anyway, ours wasn't Catholic, but it was fundy. The Bible
Yeah.
is literal. Adam and Eve were there. Noah built the ark. Moses parted the Red Sea. Jesus was born in a manger. He died on a cross. He will come again. One day we will all go to a literal heaven and live and a happy, clappy Xanadu in the sky for all eternity. And that was very much my background. And I believed it for decades of my life. So,
Well, I always find it because like I definitely had some weird indoctrination and stuff when I was a Catholic, because especially as a woman, you're given certain messaging. As a queer person, you're also given certain messaging, and that took some time to kind of untangle. But when I hear people, but I also like, I learned evolution in school. I learned science, so so when I, especially being on online spaces and talking to people that like grew up young earth creationists, that to me is so bizarre, that the fundamentalists that teach those sort of things, kind of boggles the mind, because it's inherently not true, and it's very easy to find out the truth about these things, and people just keep hammering it, and it's very strange to me,
well,
especially with like the homeschooling and stuff like that as well.
I was in our religious school. We were trained, programmed to make fun of Charles Darwin and evolution. And it's funny because we didn't know what it was, but we knew it was false, right? So if someone had
Hmm.
come up to me and they said, well, which part of On the Origin of Species did you find uncompelling? I would have to say, well, I never read On the Origin of Species. It was always, just making jokes and dismissing, totally unconcerned with the fact that we were embracing a magical story about a cosmic wizard that conjured a dirt man and rib woman in an enchanted garden with talking snakes, right? And we didn't see the irony in that, but it's funny. Most religious schools are not education first environments. They are ideology first environments.
Hmm.
This was what happened to me. Third grade, I'm in public school, and I came home and I told my devoutly religious mother about what I had learned in school about Neanderthal man. And I don't know if they were talking about, how the invention of the wheel and the harnessing of fire and,
Hmm.
primitive man living in caves. And mom was horrified, horrified. What satanic indoctrination is happening at these public institutions? And so she immediately took me and my two sisters and ripped us out of public school. And we went to church schools all the way through my graduation. And there was a Bible class, like a whole hour. You just went in and we memorized Bible verses on which we were tested, and we supposedly were taught all the Bible, which is complete crap. It was a cherry picking nightmare. We had chapel services every Wednesday, which were like church services. So one Wednesday we had to dress up, slacks and a tie, specifically to dress up and look good for the Lord on Wednesdays, and there were dress code rules. I tell you, Helen, the one that always freaks me out, and I wrote about this in my book, Christianity Made Me Talk Like an Idiot. They
I
were
own
talking
that
about
book.
how in my Christian
Good read.
school, boys were allowed to wear jeans, blue jeans,
Hmm.
but girls were not. And the reason was is because blue jeans were too form-fitting on the female figure. We didn't want to create objects of desire and lust for the boys. No, no. And I was the whole time, but on Friday, if there was a football game in the fall, we'd have a big pep rally, and we called it Spirit Week. Everybody had spirit. Yay, big football game coming up. And then the girls were allowed to wear jeans as a reward on those Fridays. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Does this turn them into a harlot and it's a bad thing? And if that's the case, why then are you treating it like a reward? Like, here's your lollipop, here's something good that you need to work toward. It made no sense. And the girls just wore form-fitting clothing of another kind. You know, it was just as form-fitting as anything else. I mean, the more they tried to repress the sexuality of their students, the more they tried to sort of make them sexually anonymous, the worse it was, the more clever the students became, you know. But that was my background. It was very much a literal Bible. It was ideology first, and I'm kind of embarrassed at how long it took me to finally start to wake up. Some people, they have their epiphany and they're out in 10 minutes, you know. And for me, it just took, I mean, I was 37. I was 37, and I just feel so stupid sometimes when I look back and think about it in that way.
I was about 36, 36, 37 years old. So, I feel you, and it's very strange once, like I would say, the toothpaste is out the tube when now that we're out of it, I can't go back. Like my brain just finds the whole idea of any sort of faith or things that are not based on evidence to I find it absolutely absurd. And to look back where I believe like crystals have healing powers and shit like that and not believe that anymore, I don't even recognize that person anymore.
Oh, the one that gets me, actually, there's a couple, and I'm embarrassed, but I've admitted it on my own show, and I'll admit it to you here. But especially when I was younger, I always thought men had one fewer ribs than women because God made woman out of Adam's rib. So he went down, grabbed the rib, and he made Eve. And I thought for some reason, then all of their offspring would not, which I mean, even from a genetics point of view, makes no sense. But I thought, oh, how long would it have taken me just to go 1, 2, 3, 4, literally count the ribs? No. Right? I also believed that the Grand Canyon was created pretty much overnight in the Great Flood. You know, the biblical story has the rains coming down from on high. And then also the earth opened up and the floodwaters poured up sort of out of the bowels of the planet. And I'm like, well, that makes sense here because look, it almost looks like something that would have cracked open and erupted water onto the surface of the world. And that's another great example. I mean, all it took was just a cursory look. How did penguins walk thousands of miles from the Antarctic to board a boat in the middle of the desert? I don't know. How did one guy 500 years old build a stadium-sized boat out of trees and tar? What about all the specialized diets for the various animals, like bamboo shoots for the panda and meat for the carnivores and plants for the herbivores? And why did God say specific instructions about qubits? I mean, absolutely down to the wire, specific verbal instructions, and then go totally mute and make Noah send a bird to go out and do recon to try to find land. That makes no sense. And because the ark had no sail, motor, or rudder, it wouldn't have made a lick of difference because the ark couldn't be steered. They could have been 50 feet from shore. They would have floated right on by. I mean, the whole story. How did 8 people commit incest to repopulate the earth, making 20,000 ethnic groups in 4,000 years, right? All of these questions were right there, ripe for the asking. And instead, I was just married to the belief. I did a speech last fall about identity beliefs and why people who hold identity beliefs are so hard it's so hard to get them to change their minds or at least consider that they might be wrong. And this goes beyond religion. And we find people even on the left, my fellow libs, who they can fall in love with an idea to the point where they stop thinking And anybody who says they are immune to that, they're lying. Who is it? Was it Feynman who said that you are the easiest person to fool? And we are
Hmm.
all flawed, emotional bags of animated meat. We are all creatures of bias. So we have to, not that everybody's equal, but we have to keep our eyes and ears open. But when I was a Christian, I was such an identifier that
Hmm.
if I had said, no, it's not true, then what? My whole identity goes to pieces, and I got to figure out who I am from scratch. And holy shit, that is exactly what happened in my mid 30s. That was a long ass process, and it was a hard process, But I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I got through it, and now one of my goals is to try to help other people do the same, for what it's worth. So.
Well, I like, did you learn like the IBLP stuff, or was this like a separate fundy church from the
Uh,
IBLP?
Well, the Institute for Basic Life Principles was made famous, for those who aren't aware, by Bill Gothard, who
Hmm.
was, I mean, one of the most ill-qualified, misogynistic, irresponsible writers of any school curriculum that has ever been. I mean, it just blows your mind. If you watch the documentary Shiny Happy People, you will see kind of an example of what IBLP has produced. And their workbooks are a nightmare. I mean, the kind of questions like why do you, I'm trying to think, this is just an approximation of what one of those questions might sound like, but why did God make the trees green? I mean, that's the question. So you've got the assumption of God built into the front. It's not, did God make the
Hmm.
trees green? It's why or how did he make them green? And the curriculum that I first used was similar. It was the ACE program, the Accelerated Christian Education Program. We used PACE workbooks. And I like the idea of the
Hmm.
pace book in a sense. It was a workbook that you would sort of go at your own pace. You could do these sections. And so you weren't, if you were slower, you didn't have to keep up with the fastest people in the class. But if you were more advanced, you could move at a greater speed and do more, get more information done. But the curriculums themselves are terrifying. They were
Hmm.
absolutely terrifying. You weren't required to have a licensed teaching degree to be
Hmm.
a teacher. They weren't called teachers, they were called monitors. We worked in partitions that had little pieces of cardboard on each side of us. So you would sit
Hmm.
in your little module and you would do your lessons when you had a question. You would take a
Hmm.
little American flag and you would put it on the top of your little partition, and the monitor would come and try to help you, but often they didn't know the answers. And Helen, one interesting thing about the about Temple Christian School
Hmm.
was they provide a great example of how children are indoctrinated into Christian nationalism. Our uniforms were red, white, or blue pants, red, white, or blue shirt. And on Wednesdays, Chapel Wednesdays, we had to wear a necktie that was a clip on tie that had American flags on it. And every day we had to stand with hand over heart and we said a pledge of allegiance to the American flag, the Christian flag, and the Bible. And I can recite those pledges verbatim even today. It's just burned. And
Hmm.
we were taught, you need to grow up and graduate and enter the world to retake the United States for Jesus. So, whether you go into politics or whether you become an evangelist or whether you're witnessing at your office or whether you're raising the nuclear family without any of those nasty gay people in it or whatever, you know,
Hmm.
were trying to shape us. And, it was hardcore. And, so now when I look back, I get angry about it because I think even though my parents were sincerely in the belief that they were doing the right thing, they were inadvertently doing real damage, and that damage took a lot of time to undo.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, on the note of remembering, I can recite the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, the Virgin, the Praise of
Yeah.
the Virgin Mary. Like it's never go. Like I can do all the moves. You put me in a church, I'm going to follow the routine. It's in there. It is, those neurons are never going to get unstuck together. Um, Yeah, and I think that's the point. And this kind of leads into your topic because, when you grow up in those systems, you're kind of like your priest or your preacher or your deacon or whomever is your leader, and you're supposed to do what they say, and because they have direct line to the big guy. So obviously, they know everything, and if you grow up in that structure where you have to follow somebody that is ordained by God, I see why people fall for authoritarian leaders, and they find it much more easier to give their thinking over to somebody else.
My own evangelical, my father passed away a few years ago, but we were very estranged. We had a few moments of, I don't know, not reconciliation, but there was a tiny connection made on his deathbed that I'm thankful for. But the
Mm-hmm.
whole time it was, and my mother and I do not speak. She's 85, and because of certain boundary violations, we just simply do not have a relationship. This gives me no joy, but it's not my fault,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I've come to terms with that. But it's funny because if you read the Bible, it says, honor thy father and thy mother. And then there's a verse that talks about how you need to obey your parents so that you can live a long life. Now, the implication there is that if you don't obey your mom and dad, you won't live a long life. Why is that? Well, because God may end your life prematurely. Death threat. Okay. And this
Mm-hmm.
is one of those things that's kind of pounded into the brains of young kids. Man, you want to make sure not to piss off God. You got to do what your parents say. And there's no age limit on the obey your parents or honor your mother and your father command. So, let's say I'm a guy in my 40s going, I've deconstructed and I'm doing what I do. There's for many people in certain families, a sense of propriety. Well, I brought you into this world and I raised you and I put a roof over your head and I get to tell you, I get to render an opinion about who you are and what you think and why you're wrong. And that extends far beyond religion. Who you love, who you marry, who you can't marry, what kind of job you should have, what denomination of church should you be a part of, how should you baptize your children, blah, blah, blah. And they
Mm-hmm.
play that card. I'm your mother. I'm your father. Well, that's an appeal to authority. I mean, they are essentially asserting their own authority to step over the threshold of your private space and govern who you are and what you do. And we see this very much in high control cultures, high control fundamental Christianity. Islam is a great example as well. And it's weird because that's one of the things that probably took me the longest to get over, to get past. Oh, she's your mother. Just roll your roll, put up with it, let her do what she's gonna do. And we tend to do that. Well, I think of all the sacrifices she made, and she loves you in her heart, and all of those things are true. But more than one thing can be true at a time. So
Mm-hmm.
while she did care and she did love her children, and while she sacrificed much, and while she is a true believer trying to do the right thing, and she's absolutely sincere, she's also being pretty goddamn inappropriate. And she doesn't get to step over the threshold of an adult child's private space to tell him or her how to live. And I finally had to come to that. And it was such a foreign language in my family to see me do that. Everybody else is rolling over and they're kind of wincing, even the believers, when mom would meddle, they'd be like, oh, yeah, well, just, put up with it. Well, whatever, just let it
Right.
roll off your shoulders. Meanwhile, I'm the guy who's like, no, I hold up the hand and say, you do not have permission. And to my family, that's a foreign language. That was like, what? They simply had not seen anything like that done. And they were and remain tremendously uncomfortable with it because in their minds, I have not honored my mother and my father. I am not a creature of obedience under the eyes of God. And that to them is a precarious place to be. And I find it unfortunate, despite the fact that it's cost me a relationship, it has also liberated me in terms of agency. I'm free. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm free. And if someone wants to give me counsel in good faith, I think I need to keep my eyes and ears open for that and receive that. But if somebody steps over the threshold and starts to point me around and direct my life for me, nope, you're out. That boundary line has been drawn,
Right.
and I'll continue to draw it.
And I think that's a very healthy thing to do. My dad passed away in July, and it brought up a lot of issues with myself and my brothers. And right now, I don't have much of a relationship with my brothers, just because I am the atheist in the family. My brothers are believers, and they don't know what to do with me because I'm the only person that knows I'm never going to see my father again, as far as I know,
Yeah.
and when you have that disconnect, it's hard to bridge the gap, even though like I made peace with my dad, before he passed away. Because he said that we had a conversation and he was like, well, I promised, my best friend Peter Sconces that I would meet him at the gate, the pearly gates. And I said, Dad, I hope that's true because that means you and I will see each other again. But I said, but we just don't know. And he goes, you're right. We just don't know, but I choose to believe. And I was like, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. That is a great conversation. We came to an agreement as parent and child. We bridged that gap, and I had that moment with him before he passed. Some people don't get that, and
It's
that's what's
pretty
so
honest
sad.
to
Yeah,
say, that's where I want to go with this
yeah,
because it gives me comfort. I mean, you didn't say that
yeah,
much, but I think it's the subtext
yeah.
is certainly there. With my father's funeral, and I'm shocked they asked if I wanted to say a few words from the stage because he and I were not in a good place at all. They're like, everybody's going to go out and the kids are going to take the stage. Would you like to say a few words about your father? And I was like, really? And I play a little piano. My mother asked if I would go play religious songs on the piano, and I politely declined because it felt like a setup. No, I'm not doing that. But I will go up and say a few words. And whenever they were talking about Dad, when you hear people speak at memorial services in these high control religious environments, you begin to realize how much they rob people of themselves. When they talked about Dad, mostly it was Jesus. He loved Jesus and he was such a good man of God. And, he used to keep Bibles with him and he would hand out Bibles and he just loved the Lord and he was so obedient and he just loved God and Jesus, Jesus, God, God. And after the third person did that, I thought, I've been sitting here for 15 minutes and I don't know who the man is. Like, if I was a stranger sitting in the audience, I wouldn't know what his personality was like. I wouldn't know what he had done, what he had accomplished in his life. All I heard was that he was Christ-like. And so it took me, the atheist, to go up and spend 5 minutes to actually talk about who he was as a human being. He was raised here and he had two brothers that he was very close to, and he had all these quirks. He was from Minnesota. We go up there and fish for a walleye and northern pike out on the lake, and he used to mow the lawn in his polyester slacks, and he used to fall asleep in his chair, and he wore hearing aids, and sometimes they would feed back at the dinner table, and we'd all run out of the room, and all of these anecdotes that brought who he was to life were absent because when you're so immersed in a faith, it, you aren't important as much as the fact that you are like Jesus. So people essentially are talking about Jesus instead of talking about Dad. And it took the heathen, the non-believer, to talk about Dad. I won't speak at moms. I cannot do it. I can't. But I'll tell you, if I did, I would address the person. Instead of talking about how godly she was, I would try to find things about who she was as a person and flesh that out for others. Christianity has this thing, not Christ, no, wait, not me, but Christ lives in me. So the idea is I die to myself. It's like baptism. You have to die to yourself, and then you are raised again, a new creature in Christ. So Jesus is here so that your sin nature is now covered with Christ. Well, if you look at that to its core, it's pretty insidious because it's a killing of you and your identity and your agency and a replacing of you with an authority. And then that authority, you're supposed to be led by the nose by that authority through the rest of your life. And I find that pretty insidious. I know devout Jesus lovers would disagree. Oh, no, it's voluntary. We love him. He knows what's best. But the truth is, they killed a part of who you are and replaced it with an authority. And I find that very problematic.
Yeah, it is, and it like Rob just said, it is despicable. It's a despicable ideology to remove someone's agency. And the Catholic Church, you're baptized as a baby. So you don't even have time to develop any sort of personality, that your family is going to raise you Catholic, and you have godparents that are supposed to, if your parent, if something happens to your parents, they're supposed to take over, and you make, a lifelong commitment at 14 years old to follow Christ. What age were you baptized at?
I was 9, I think, when I finally got baptized. It was an Assembly of God church. I sort of got 31 flavors. My dad was ex-Lutheran. My mom was a speak in tongues Pentecostal, and I went to a
Wow.
Baptist school. So, I mean, I got the conservative and I got the Pentecostal, and then I got everything in between. We went to non-denominational churches. The one common thread was the Bible was literally true. But no, I got baptized. I remember being scared. I didn't want to go up and stand in front of everybody, and I was nervous about is the water going to be cold, and I don't want somebody dunking my head under the water, and then it was over. It's like a big relief, but I didn't understand the implications. I just knew I was supposed to do it. Like you get saved, and then you have to get baptized, and even when I got saved, I repeated that process over and over. So I got saved at a revival service at Eastwood Baptist when I was very young. Parents dropped us off, we're there, and fire and brimstone guy comes in, and before you know it, we're all like, Jesus, save me. I don't want to go to hell. And then they bring you up and say, everybody, this is Seth. Seth has accepted the Lord into his heart today, and we know we're all going to be together in heaven. Amen. Amen. Everybody said amen, because we didn't applaud in that particular Baptist church. You don't clap. You just say amen.
Okay.
And then I went home that night and I said the same prayer again. And then a few days later, I remember thinking, well, what if I disqualified myself? I've had bad thoughts. No, I'm a sinner. Lord, please forgive me and wipe my heart. Lord, please come into my heart. Please come into my heart. And I would say the salvation prayer off and on to myself repeatedly over the course of years, because you never know when that warranty is going to run out. You just you never know. Did I disqualify myself? I don't want to cook forever, screaming and writhing in the inferno. So no, dear Lord, please wipe my heart. I'm so sorry, I'm a sinner. Please come back into my heart. And I said the salvation prayer repeatedly. I think hell theology specifically does qualify as a kind of child abuse.
Oh yeah.
I think, some people, I don't throw the word abuse around lightly, but it can be abuse at any age. If you do not do this, you are going to I don't know how hell works because you don't have skin. Are you given skin and then it burns away and then it regenerates and then it burns away and nerves? I don't know.
I've had the same question, and it's a mind fuck. I've had the same. I'm like, how does this work? And that's the number one. Like we told you this before. This is the number one thing people call about recovering from religion is the fear of hell. They can logically know it doesn't exist, but the emotional fear, they can be 30 years out, and it's always in the back of their mind. Like, am I going to go to hell because I don't believe anymore, or I doubt it, or whatever it is?
When I left the faith, that was one of the, I felt like I was, as an apostate, I was the castle. And so they would launch the apologist in my family, especially mom and dad, would launch an attack against my heathenry, and they would try a different tactic or angle every time. So the first time would be like love. Oh, but we love you so much. We want to be reunited. And then there would be like, look at all the evidence. The evidence is everywhere. And then they would go after the scientist and say that science is a religion. And then they'd come back the next day and they'd say something else. But one of the tactics was, you will burn in hell. I remember mom said something like, the non-believer will be the ashes under the feet of the believer. And I mean, that's a pretty awful thing to hear from anybody, especially from a parent. At no point did she think, why do I adore and worship someone who would turn my earthly son to ash? Right? Why would I
Mhm.
adore someone who would cook my own flesh, my own child to death over and over again? That's how fucked up
Mhm.
I think so much of this it is. It takes people who try to be moral in so many other aspects of their life, and then they hear the story of Abraham dragging his poor son to the altar and being this close to driving a knife into his chest, and they're like, "Wow, what a wonderful man! The obedience is so great. We should all be more like Abraham." It's an indicator of just how damaging and distorting fundy, high control religions can be. And again, that takes us back to authority, I guess.
Yeah. I want to know that conversation going back down the hill. Well, I was going to kill you, but my Sky Daddy told me not to. It's one of those things that you have to think about because I have children. They're grown now, but they ask a lot of questions when they're younger. And if I did something they didn't particularly like, they would ask me why. And I think one of the biggest things you could do that's really kind of fucked up is try to kill your kid.
Imagine, imagine Isaac's perception of his father moving forward. I mean, I would be giving my dad the side eye. I'd be getting out of Dodge. Can someone else adopt me? I need 24-hour security because who knows what the hell
Right.
this guy's capable of. He's out of his mind. And what's the purpose of the exercise? Obedience to authority. Don't tell me it was a test of Abraham's faith because God's omniscient. He would have already known that Abraham had whatever quantity of faith that he had.
Right.
So then the question is, well, is he trying to exercise some sort of a faith muscle inside Abraham to build his faith? Tell me there's a better way to do that than child sacrifice. And yet here we are with the Abrahamic faiths dominating the planet. The admiration for a guy who almost stuck a blade into the chest of his own child and had to be stopped. He was so committed that the angel had to stay his hand, and yet this is a character of admiration in the Fundy faiths, and I find that pretty terrible.
I and I also what's just like kind of disturbing because it is a story about adherence to authority, but there's also historical context where people in the past would do child sacrifices at times when famines and there was too much overpopulation because they thought well, we got to appease the gods to get our food or whatever. People do all kinds of crazy stuff. That's what we do as human beings. We're emotional, irrational meatbags that will do irrational things when we're not thinking logically and not thinking with empathy. And that's just something we've been doing since people be people, but it's all the same thing. If it wasn't we had, Abraham appealing to God, now we have people appealing to the orange shit gibbon. So,
And another shade of that is in order to excuse the cruelty that is done to others in the name of authority, we often will rob the other of their humanity. I did an interview with John Musgrave, who was featured in the Ken Burns documentary, The Vietnam War. And John Musgrave was a Marine, and he was horribly wounded. He was horribly wounded and wasn't expected to live. And he came out of the war and did survive and told his story. But he was talking about the first time he ever killed a North Vietnamese soldier. He said, he saw his face, and he said he couldn't live with it. It ripped his guts out. It was such an affront to his own moral center. But it was shortly after that one of John's buddies got killed by, I think, a mine, some kind of something buried in the ground that killed his buddy horribly. And he said, it was at that time that I made my deal with the devil. And I said, I'll never kill another human being as long as I live, but I will wax a gook. I'll smoke a zip or whatever. What they did was they they stripped the idea of the enemy of all humanity. So now you're not a North Vietnamese soldier, you are this thing, and I can kill a thing. And human beings have been doing that to each other since forever. We're seeing it
Mm-hmm.
now in sort of the culture and cult of Trump, where everybody is an other who is subhuman, who is a danger to you, your values, your religion, your church, your job, your children, your sexuality, your freedoms, whatever. And once you have motivated an entire demographic to dehumanize all the other demographics, holy shit, you have created a monster. So now,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it a Muslim? Is it someone with non-white skin? Is it someone near the border trying to get into the United States to escape danger and oppression? Is it an LGBT person? Everything from socialists to
Mm-hmm.
Democrats to blood drinking Hillary Clinton minions who are trafficking babies out of the basement of a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor. I mean, these people have so many crazy, evil, bad guy stories queued up. And they're so wired for this sort of constant state of emergency that now it's a holy war narrative. The authority then has them primed to crush the wicked,
Mm-hmm.
and now they can do whatever they want because they're wicked, they're out of the will of God. They're certainly not equal in the eyes of God. You can do whatever you want to them. And honestly, the culture of cruelty keeps me up at night. I am just
Me
stunned,
too.
shocked by the gleeful celebration, the cheerleading of cruelty that we are seeing all around us in this country.
It keeps me up awake too. And as someone that's part of these marginalized groups, like constantly being called a groomer, constantly having someone think just because you're part of a demographic of queer people that they'll say the worst things about you without knowing you. All they have is based on like your demographic are these type of people. And it's gross and disgusting. Going back to what you said about the military, my son is in the Army, and he sent me his Army Bible, and there's a little guidebook that comes with it, and it tells from a Christian perspective why the do not kill commandment is actually do not murder, and like, well, if you're in war, it's okay to kill other people, and it goes into that dehumanizing because you have to be able to do that if you're going to take up arms against another human being that hasn't really done anything to you.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of God and country language baked into our military culture. We did a show years ago, and we probably need to do another one about people who, they're seculars and they're looking for
Mhm.
alternatives to, the military chapels. All right, here's your choice. You can go scrub latrines or you can go to Christian chapel, right? Well, that's not really fair. you know, how about a humanist thing, or to go do some public service for an hour, or to go and just relax and enjoy nature for an hour and call that, a kind of worship to Mother Earth, if you will. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
lot of inequity. But, if you motivate a culture of people to do what they do, even awful things, because God insists, then maybe that's, we understand the utility of God language in that context.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, and it was funny, my because I don't know how this was before Trump, um, but my son was saying like at his particular base there is a chaplain. If you're Muslim, you get videos, and if he's an atheist, so he gets mental health services if he wants to talk to somebody. But any other religion that is represented, they don't have like a rabbi. If you're Jewish, I don't know who a leader in the Hindi faith would be, but they don't get the same access as so Christianity has kind of that superior sort of place even within, it was supposed to be a secular organization. The military is supposed to be secular, but they're supposed to revive religious services to people of all faiths or
Mhm.
lack thereof.
Ironic too that they there's a whole culture of people who are banging their Bibles and they're screaming about trans people trolling for your kids in restrooms and all that. And you know who I don't see assaulting kids in the news? Trans people. You know who I see?
Yeah.
I see headlines about freaking pastors and worship pastors and youth pastors and children's pastors and priests. I mean, time after time after time. Where's the outrage there? And there's a complete blind spot in the
Mhm.
church for all of the abusers. And what makes it even more insidious is that a lot of churches will find out they'll have abuse reported within their walls. And instead of going straight to the police, they say, well, we're going to handle it internally because it is a spiritual matter. We're going to pray and we're going to keep them accountable. We're going to assign accountability partners. But mostly, they sweep it under the rug. This happened in my home city of Tulsa. We had some guy is touching kids, and it comes out, and the church is like, "Oh well, this is an internal matter." Mostly, they just hushed the whole thing, and didn't tell the parents, and it went on for years. More abuse, more molestation, child rape
Mhm.
until finally somebody came forward and blew the whistle loud enough that the cops showed up. That guy's now doing a life sentence. And I think to myself, that is, where's the outrage there? Why would you have to create a bad guy? Why would you have to go out and manufacture villains who are really just good people wanting to live their lives in peace and safety, while ignoring the abusers right under your own church steeples? I find that very hypocritical and extremely problematic.
Uh, I mean, like, my CCD teacher committed, unalived himself when the Spotlight stories came out. When luckily, I did not experience that in the church. My parents were not about to let anyone that was not a trusted family member or friend watch their children, even a priest. Which
Yeah.
was, at least my parents had the wherewithal to do that. Thank you, parents. And it's and that's what made me leave. But also too, like, that's what I hear. It's always somebody in the JWs or somebody in the Mormon church or somebody in the Catholic church. The Catholic, and also they hire lawyers, so sentence gets reduced within their own churches, which is also insidious because it's just prolonging the pain and the justice that should be served to the victims.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It remains an epidemic problem. I forgot what the statistic was, but like roughly 6% of priests in the Catholic Church are guilty of some kind of violation. And I think that number is between 5 and 6% even in Christian churches, of inappropriate, if not predatory behaviors that often get swept right under the rug.
Right. And it's fucked up.
Yeah.
It is like, what was it, just like a couple of years ago, it was 260,000 victims were in France that came, a big report was released. 260,000 children, and people that grew up as adults and that experienced this trauma within the French Catholic Church. It's really, really fucked up.
Mm.
And for some reason, we have to victimize other people that just want to live a safe life.
Yeah. Well, how many times have we seen good people who have been othered and dehumanized, persecuted, prosecuted, often harmed and killed? And we're seeing that a resurgence of that attitude today. I worry. I worry that what we are seeing is going to result in a literal civil war. I think at some point a powder keg is going to explode, and we are going to see those who have dehumanized the other, who are going to resort to violence, and then there's going to have to be a violent pushback against them to try to keep good people from getting hurt. And it's going to be probably a decades long I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just speculating, but these are some of the fears that I have. This is kind of some of the stuff I think about when I wake up at 3 in the morning and stare at the ceiling. I'm kind of tired of being a part of a daily historical event. I'm kind of ready for just a
Yeah,
nice,
I
quiet.
don't want to live in unprecedented times.
Yeah,
I
I
just
would like,
don't.
I would like to live in
I
a
want boring again.
boring time. Absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
like the past 4 years were very boring. Like, and I kind of like it that way. It wasn't great. There were
Yeah.
some problems, but I wasn't doom scrolling. I wasn't thinking, oh my God, am I going to lose my rights? Oh my God, is this going to happen? And every day I'm like, oh, right. I live in terrible land. Um, and that's especially living in a democracy, but I have to remind myself that 1920s Germany was a democracy. So, and history repeats itself over and over and over again.
It's a classic authoritarian handbook. You
Yeah.
keep your people in a state of emergency. You
Mhm.
then come out and say, "I will be your savior. All you have to do is surrender to me all of your rights and agency. Just trust me. I'll take care of it." Then you use the democratic process to achieve the pinnacle of power. Once you achieve that, you dismantle democracy and you rule as a king. It has been done over and over and over throughout our history, and we are seeing it being done right now. And it blows my mind.
It's just I'm just exhausted. I like it's only been like what 2 months, a month and a half, and I'm already exhausted, and I'm not looking forward to it. I'm gonna age 10 years by the time that this is over. I'm convinced. And so in regards to what do you and your just from your layman's perspective, what do you think other than religion, what do you think it leads people to want to follow like a charismatic leader?
Well, I think there are so many factors at play. Some people, I think, are primed from youth to respond or respect or defer. I think some of this can be pounded into the skulls of kids. And then as they grow up, they have a hard time shaking that stuff loose. I think there are some who get overwhelmed
Hmm.
and they're like, I don't know what's going on. I can't process it all. And so then they respond to a strong figure, an assuring presence, somebody who comes in with, a certain, they cut a certain shape and they speak in a confident tone of voice and they say, no, 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 I do understand all of this and I will take care of it and I will take care of you. And that's
Hmm.
attractive, I think, to people who feel overwhelmed. I think authoritarians seek out vulnerable people. So often, if someone has been through some shit and they are damaged in a lot of ways, they have scars, maybe even some open wounds. They come in and they say, "I will heal. I will take care of it. I will make it all better. I will be the balm that helps you to move forward into the coming days, weeks, months, and years." That's attractive to a lot of people. I think fear is part of that equation. We talk about people under authoritarian regimes. Was it 10,000 people have already tried to desert out of Putin's army fighting in Ukraine? They
Hmm.
they won out. They're like, I don't want to do this, but even those who stay, many stay because they're like, well, if I don't fight, I have a family back on behind Russian borders and they might lose everything. They might be persecuted by the totalitarians. I have a responsibility to try to keep them safe. And so I think fear plays into it. There's so many factors and a combination. Again, more than one thing can be true at the same time.
Hmm.
But, certainly, I think religion and religious cultures are especially, prone to respond to this stuff, and it scares me. You know what I don't get? Even when I was a devout believer, I could see a lot of the con men coming. Like, my parents met at Oral Roberts University. Oral Roberts, for those who don't know, is a big televangelist, and he was millionaire, And he came up with all kinds of crazy stories. And even as a believer, I thought, well, that guy's totally full of crap. Right.
Hmm.
I knew. And my family was so mad at me for criticizing because they just thought he hung the moon. He's God's man, you know. But
Okay.
and yet even in the church, I was like, that guy's full of crap. He's a con man, you know. And so I'm convinced, even though I did believe the Bible and whatnot, I would have seen Donald Trump waving his Bible, and I would have known that guy was totally full of crap. And I think what really, really confounds me is that so many people, after all of this, after all of the things he has said, and after all the people he has cheated, and after all of the women he has degraded, and after all the money he's stolen, and after all of the lies he has told, somehow they still don't see it. And I become less charitable with those people. Yeah. I understand they're brainwashed. I understand this indoctrination. I understand information silos. I understand that the oligarchs have weaponized whole media networks like Fox News. I understand all of that. But still, at some point, you're going to have to own it. You're going to have to wake up. You're going to have to watch, look, listen, and acknowledge that this guy's a con. How come I could have seen Oral
Hmm.
Roberts coming from 1,000 yards away when I was a devout Bible believing, Bible literalist Christian, but someone else can't see the pussy grabbing grifter and see him coming from 1,000 miles away? And I just, that makes me crazy. And I've become less charitable about him over the last few months for sure. In fact, if I can be totally honest, I feel absolute rage. I'm
No, no.
livid. I'm livid.
I see you, Seth. I see you.
Okay.
Because it's disgusting. And like, because like the first round, I was like, all right, I'm like, he's a buffoon. We still had things in place that kind of, kept him in check. Um, I didn't understand why anyone would vote for him. My dad did, which was weird, but then he didn't vote for him a second time. So, yeah, he didn't vote for him a second time. So that was great. Vote for my dad. But it's one of those things that like I couldn't grasp like how someone like him who is just a TV personality, he has no experience running anything, um, gets the highest office in the world. It is mind boggling. And he's like, what was it, 27 counts? 27 crimes he was committed of?
I think
Something
37.
insane like that? Is it 37? I don't know. It's some kind of crazy number.
Well, I I give just a little bit of grace to the 2016 voters. Not
That's,
much.
yeah, look.
Not much. But yeah, okay. The system is broken. You didn't like Hillary. You bought the outsider narrative, the self-made business genius narrative, right? Some of that stuff about him fabricating his past and screwing his vendors and creeping on teen pageant girls and all that other stuff. Maybe you hadn't encountered that information and you were still in love with the marketed persona, the fiction of Donald Trump, and you said, okay, fine, let's see what happens.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. I mean, a lot of us were ringing the alarm bells, but okay, fine. But in 2024, there's just absolutely no excuse. There is no reason. There is no story. There is no justification. And I have a lot less grace for those people right now. And I feel real resentment. There are friendships that, Natalie and I are not connecting with Trump voters on our tennis team that we've connected with before.
Mhm.
We're even more disconnected from family functions because there are a lot of MAGAs in there. And I'm in conflict because part of me is like, well, I don't want to not engage. But at the same time, I'm like, well, what's it going to freaking take? Like, when's enough? Because enough should have been enough 9 years ago. But for us, we've simply removed ourselves from a lot of those circles and are working. I just think I'm not an expert, Helen, but I tend to think at this point, the only thing that's going to wake them up is eventually when Trump does something that hurts them, something or someone they care about. So and I've said that to my MAGA associates. I'm like, when he's done screwing everybody else over, when he's done going after all these other people that you've dismissed or dehumanized or don't care about or don't know about, eventually he's going to come around to damaging or destroying someone or something that you care about. And when that does happen, my sympathy centers are pretty numb. And I'm not proud of the fact that I feel that way, but it's just kind of how I feel, and I think by the time they feel that pain, it's probably going to be too late. But I don't know. I'm not an expert. This is just my emotional meat bag is
Right.
is venting right now,
Well, I mean, there was already a consequence when people they fuck around and find out, like, and people were on social media saying like, I voted for the Jaguars that ate my face party. I didn't think they were going to eat my face, and then the tariff stuff started happening, and then they started seeing like the Hispanic neighbors, and friends and coworkers and family members, risk being deported, and it's like, yes, this is going to happen. Like my coworker, I said, I'm terrified of Project 2025. And she kept saying, I don't think he's going to do that. And lo and behold, we are now seeing the roosters have come home. And it's just like, yes, because when somebody says something, I tend to believe them. And even though on the front end, he was saying that I'm not in support of this, I don't know what it is, everyone in his circle, he had ties to the Heritage Foundation. So of course, this is happening. And I just don't have any excuse for people saying like, I
I think, too, with the Elon Musk thing happening, a lot of folks are like, whoa, hey, wait a minute. How'd that guy end up in the picture? And then I see Elon's been fighting with the astronauts on the freaking International Space Station. I mean, if there's a more beloved, iconic profession in the United States, probably firefighter and astronaut are probably right up there. So he's telling lies about the astronauts being stranded because of a political move. And the astronauts are coming forward and they're like, that's just a bunch of crap. And they're refuting him in real time. And then he's calling for the space station to be defunded. And I part of me wonders if they're going to self-immolate at some point, but I think they may take the rest of us down with it. I was talking to Janice Selby from Divorcing Religion about her new book, and she's a Canadian. And I'm like, hey, do you have room on your futon? Can Natalie and I fit in the guest room? Can we ask for asylum? Is there a part of the world that would take us? Because right now that sounds kind of attractive to us,
I really want to get my dual citizenship just in case, because my mom's still Canadian. So I get see if I can get my dual citizenship. Because I don't want to leave. I just bought a new house. So, I'm kind of stuck. But at the same time, it's like, oh no. And it could put you in that place of like, can I live someplace else? Because this is terrible, But then there's another part of me that's like, do I abandon people that can't leave? And can I do something with a little bit of privilege that I have? I don't know. It's hard, especially since I have a trans child. Yeah. It's hard. Very, very hard.
I don't know what the right answer is. We fantasized about getting out of here and because I can do what I do from most anywhere. I mean, obviously I do a lot of speaking and connecting at events in the 50 states or the lower 48 anyway. And I really do enjoy that. I mean, I'm going to Orlando and I think I'm speaking at American Atheist in Minneapolis, and I'm going to Canada. I'll be up in Alberta and then Sarnia coming up in the summer, and Nashville's coming up. And that would be much harder if I lived in, I don't know, New Zealand. But
it would be. Well, you could do activism in New Zealand.
I do, I do wonder what would it be like? As right now we've seen these executive orders come down about rooting out what they called anti-Christian bias in federal government. Well, what they called anti-Christian bias was nothing of the kind. It was just simply inclusion for all faiths and none. and the refusal to act like a church, to have the government act like a church. But again, if you dehumanize a demographic, then it's easy to go and try to crush them. Atheists have been a pretty convenient demographic for Christian nationalists. So here I am. I'm a full-time activist, author, podcaster, speaker, whatever, producer. And I think, okay, well, what happens if they decide that what I do is hate speech? What happens if they pass a
Right.
blasphemy law in the United States, much like Saudi Arabia might pass a blasphemy law against, those who criticize the prophet? And what does that mean? What does that mean for my life? Does that mean that what will I lose? Might we lose the house, and where would we go, and what would our lives look like? And all that, those are the scary conversations to have. But it's weird. We have been having those conversations, trying to develop a potential escape route in case something like that was to ever go down. I wouldn't have thought it was possible a year ago, but now it seems to be very much on the horizon.
Yeah. We've had similar conversations, not so much about like, moving, but like, what does it mean for I volunteer for 2 organizations. They're 501c3 atheist organizations. Like what if you lose your charity status?
Yeah.
Those are real concerns. And because we have freedom of speech right now, I don't know if like those of us that are, on the internet or anywhere, or even if you have the freedom to assemble and, protest, if you're, protesting the prophet, what does that mean? And like I did the nonprofits, and we were just talking about the anti-Christian office that got created in the government. It's like, we don't know what that office is actually going to do at this point. And that's what scares me.
There's is it a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that says, "Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming I am persecuted when I am merely being contradicted." And
Right.
that's been a long-standing tactic by fundy religious people, that if they feel like, well, you disagree or you're criticizing, then they clutch their pearls and cry persecution, anti-Christian bias. Well, maybe we're just saying, well, no, I don't buy it. And I'm not going to let you force it down my throat. And they're going to call that persecution no matter what happens, these desperate people. I will say that I am thankful for some religious people who have become my allies in the fight to promote state church separation and secular values. I've had them on my show. Amanda Tyler is a Baptist. She founded Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Andrew Whitehead's a sociologist. He is a believer. Dr. Robert Jones, I believe, is Jewish. I know Rachel Lazar at American United. She's Jewish, but we stand on the same side in terms of our values to make sure that the United States has an equal seat for all people. And there are those who don't get that about me. They're like, why would an atheist activist ever stand shoulder to shoulder alongside a religious person? What are you doing? You're legitimizing religion. And I'm like, no. We can have a disagreement about theology. We can have those conversations. But the most important thing is that at this moment, we share values. And that value is to separate the state and the church, to protect people, and to make an equal room for all of us. And I'll align any day with a religious person if we share those values.
I mean, I often said that, since we're supposed to live in a representative democracy, that I want to see a Jew, I want to see someone that is Muslim, I want to see someone that is Hindi, I want to see someone that is pagan, I want to see an atheist, I want to see a trans person, I want to see a gay person, I want to, black, whatever, all representative in government, because then you're kind of forced to really do the work on making equality a thing for everybody. And you don't get special privileges because, of one thing or another, that you're all on the same playing field. I would rather align with the Christian that wants to keep the separation of church and state versus the atheist that wants to persecute the Christian that and doesn't think that they don't have the right to practice their religion, because that goes against my values. Because what you believe has no effect on me until it starts to affect me.
Yeah, and that surprises a lot of religious people when I say, "Well, I'll fight for your right to believe or not
Yeah.
believe." Right? It's I may disagree with your belief. I may highly criticize it. I might even make fun of the belief if it's if it's ridicule worthy. I don't do that in the one-on-ones, but on the larger macro stage,
Oh
I
yeah.
think there's great utility in going after some of the more ridiculous beliefs. But you have a right to believe that. And if I'm truly a creature of constitutional equality, then I have to be able to stand for your rights as well as my own. And that surprises and even shocks a lot of people, but it's absolutely true.
And I think that for us, those of us that, kind of recognize that, I think, unfortunately, and like fortunately or unfortunately, depends on which way you're looking at it, we have to be those people. But like, listen, I know that you hate Christianity or whatever religion you grew up with. I get it. But if we start cutting off our noses to spite our faces, the people that we actually should be worried about, they're going to win. And unfortunately, we have to be these. Unfortunately or unfortunately, it depends on how you're looking at it. Align with the people, align with the people that you disagree with on theology. Because what are their values? Do they want LGBTQ plus rights? Do they don't think there's a problem with people coming in and protecting their families in our country and leaving, a very violent, poor area where they're constantly worried about their kids getting killed? Yeah, I think we should have empathy and kindness and allow those people and align with that, even if they do it through a God's lens.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. Values, very important.
So I know that you have to. I'm going to go play tennis, so we're going to end a little early tonight. So final thoughts.
For me, I think I think mostly. I think we can all relate to the struggle. There was that line, it's a meme that shows a metronome, and it's like on one side you want to be well informed about the events of the world, and then it flips over and you're like, I want to not go insane. And I think a lot of us are going back and forth and back and forth. And I just think, give yourself some grace. We are not wired for the fire hose of outrageous stuff that's being shot into our faces every day. The human brain, the human heart simply cannot process this. A lot of that is by design. They want to overwhelm us so that we get weary and we check out and we disengage, which allows them to get away with even more. I think let's continue to try to partition ourselves down to one, two, or maybe three key issues. Let's find opportunities to ally together. I think it's good medicine to have allies who share our values and then to work in meaningful ways towards standing up for the oppressed and for the Constitution and to stand against the culture of cruelty. And I think that goes beyond hitting like and share on social media. I think it means we're calling our elected representatives. I think we're showing up at protest. I think we're calling the people in our circle who we might be able to influence and say, this is major. Here's what's going on. I want you to be aware of it, to try to humanize the problems. And I think together we try to overcome our sense of dread and despair. And that's tough because I feel dread and despair, but I refuse to give up my sliver of optimism that we will eventually overcome the insanity of it all. I hope it happens in my lifetime. But the one thing we cannot do and should not do is to quit. I think, if we quit, they win even faster. I think we have to continue to fight because it matters. And I want us to be seen as being on the right side of history and to say that, there were millions of us who did not drink that Kool-Aid, who did not buy into the hate, who did not want to make an unequal seat at the table for one sect of people. I think we wanted to see the United States achieve the best version of itself. I want the history books to say that about me and you and all of us. And I think that's one of the things we should continue to work toward with diligence.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you, Seth. If you want to follow more of Seth's stuff, go into the description box and subscribe and like and do all the things. Monday, I have Secular Rarity. He's going to be here. He's going to talk about secular community. What is it good for? And then Stephanie, Contradiction, a friend of mine from recovering from religion, is going to, she grew up in the Mormon church. We're going to talk about purity culture next Thursday. So that's what's coming up at my show. Seth, what do you got coming up?
I am speaking on the Arizona State Capitol steps on Thursday, March the 6th at 10 a.m. to promote state church separation. March 14th through 16th weekend, Orlando, Florida Free Thought. And then the American Atheist National Convention's coming up Easter weekend in Minneapolis. Details on all of that at thethinkingatheist.com/events.
Awesome. We're not talking about purity culture, Stephanie just told me. I thought we were. We're not talking about that. We'll do something different. So, okay. Oh, that's your RFRX talk. Okay, I'm sorry. So, thank you so much for being here, Seth. It was really wonderful. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for inspiring me to become an activist. You were one of the first people to help me take that step. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for that.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. All right. Good night, everybody. Have a great week. Give someone a compliment. Be kind. Start bugging your state representatives and be a pain in their ass. All right. Bye, everybody.